The dusty wind swept through Red Rock Trading Post on that scorching afternoon in 1882, when Sarah May Cordell, a struggling widow barely surviving with her young son, locked eyes with the one man she thought she'd never see again, James Holloway, the boy who abandoned her 10 years ago without a word. But he wasn't that poor ranch hand's son anymore. He was now the richest rancher in the Arizona Territory, commanding thousands of acres and hundreds of cattle. She stood there in her worn dress, hands calloused from washing clothes for pennies, while he sat in fine leather boots worth more than she'd earn in a year. Neither of them knew that this chance encounter would unravel a decade of buried heartbreak, awaken a love they thought was dead, and set off a dangerous chain of events when her dead husband's brother arrived with threats that could destroy everything. This is the story of second chances, sacrifice, and a love that refused to die, even in the unforgiving Wild West. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over the Arizona Territory as Sarah May Cordell wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her roughened hand. The Red Rock Trading Post was busier than usual, with travelers and ranchers stopping through Copperstone on their way to somewhere better, somewhere with more promise than this dusty frontier town offered. Sarah stood behind the wooden counter, her faded calico dress patched at the elbows, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun that had come loose hours ago. Her hands moved mechanically, wrapping dried goods in brown paper, counting out change from the till, smiling politely at customers who barely looked at her. She was 29 now, though some days she felt twice that age. The trading post job paid little, but it kept food on the table for her and 6-year-old Benny. At night, she took in laundry and mending from the wealthier families in town. Sleep was a luxury she could rarely afford. Her late husband, Thomas Cordell, had died 2 years ago in a mining accident, leaving her with nothing but debts and a child to raise. She had loved Thomas, or at least she had tried to. He was a good man, steady and kind, but he was never him. He was never James. "Ma'am, can I get some tobacco and a canteen of water?" a voice called out. Sarah nodded, already reaching for the supplies. "Right away, sir." She glanced at the clock on the wall. Nearly 3 in the afternoon. Benny would be waiting for her outside, playing with the wooden horse she'd carved for him last Christmas. It wasn't much, but it was all she could give. As she handed the tobacco to the customer, the bell above the door chimed. A gust of hot wind swept through the trading post, carrying dust and the smell of leather and horses. Sarah looked up instinctively, and her breath caught in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the blinding sunlight, was a man she hadn't seen in 10 years. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black Stetson and a tailored vest that spoke of money and success. His boots were polished, his gun belt well-maintained, and his presence commanded the room without a single word. James Holloway. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Time seemed to slow, the noise of the trading post fading into a dull hum. She watched as he removed his hat, revealing dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes, those same storm-gray eyes, that had once looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. He hadn't seen her yet. He was speaking to Mr. Garrison, the trading post owner, likely placing an order for supplies to be delivered to his ranch. Sarah had heard the name Holloway whispered around town for years now. The richest rancher in the territory, owner of the Iron Creek Ranch, a man who controlled more land and cattle than anyone else for hundreds of miles. She had never connected that name to her James, the boy who used to meet her by the creek at sunset, the boy who promised her forever beneath the cottonwood trees, the boy who disappeared without a word, leaving her heartbroken and alone. Sarah's instinct was to turn away, to duck behind the shelves, to become invisible. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the counter. She looked down at her worn dress, her cracked fingernails, the calluses on her palms. What would he think if he saw her like this? A widow, poor and worn down by life, nothing like the girl she used to be. But fate had other plans. An elderly woman near the door stumbled, her basket of goods spilling across the wooden floor. Apples rolled, fabric unfurled, and a jar of preserves shattered. Without thinking, Sarah rushed over. She knelt beside Mrs. Fletcher, gathering the items gently. "Let me help you, ma'am," she said softly, placing the goods back into the basket. And that was when it happened. As Sarah stood, brushing dust from her skirt, she looked up, and her eyes locked with his. James froze mid-sentence. His hand, reaching for a piece of paper, stopped in midair. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. "Sarah," he whispered. Time collapsed between them. 10 years vanished in an instant, and suddenly Sarah was 18 again, standing barefoot by the creek, laughing as James tried to skip stones across the water and failed every time. She blinked, and the memory shattered. "James," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if unsure whether he had the right to come closer. His eyes searched her face, taking in every change, every line that hadn't been there before. She could see the shock in his expression, but also something else: recognition, longing, regret. Mr. Garrison cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'll just finish writing up that order in the back." The trading post had gone quiet. A few customers glanced their way, sensing the tension, but Sarah didn't care. All she could see was him. "It's really been 10 years, Lucas said. "It has," Olivia replied, her voice low. He studied her face. I didn't know you were still in Copperstone," James said finally, his voice deeper than she remembered, roughened by years and weather. "I never left," Sarah replied, forcing herself to stand tall despite the trembling in her knees. "This is my home." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "I heard about Thomas. I'm sorry." The mention of her late husband stung, though she wasn't sure why. "Thank you." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then James glanced around and lowered his voice. "Could we talk, just for a few minutes?" Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her to refuse, to protect herself from whatever pain this conversation might bring. But a part of her, the part that had never truly let him go, needed answers. "I have a break in 10 minutes, she said quietly. "There's a bench out back." They sat in the shade behind the trading post, the Arizona sun beating down on the dusty ground beyond the overhang. Sarah kept her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, guarding herself like a fortress. James sat beside her, hat in his hands, staring at the horizon. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "It's been a long time," he said finally. 10 years, Sarah replied, her tone neutral. 10 years, 3 months, and 12 days, but who's counting? He flinched. "Sarah, Why didn't you write?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "You left without a word, James. One day you were there, and the next you were gone. I waited. I waited for months, thinking maybe you'd send a letter, maybe you'd explain, but nothing ever came." James closed his eyes, pain etched across his face. "My father died that summer. Do you remember?" She nodded slowly. Everyone in Copperstone had known. Old Henry Holloway, a struggling cattle hand, who drank too much and died broke. "The ranch he worked for offered me a chance," James continued, his voice low. "They needed hands for a big cattle drive north. 3 months of hard riding, good pay. I thought if I could make enough money, I could come back and give you the life you deserved. A real home, not some sharecropper's shack." Sarah's throat tightened. "So you left." "I left," he admitted. "And I told myself it was just for a few months, but the drive went longer than expected. We got caught in a blizzard in Montana, lost half the herd. By the time we made it back, it had been 8 months. When I finally returned to Copperstone." He paused, swallowing hard. "You were married. To Thomas." The words hung in the air like smoke. I couldn't wait forever, James, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I thought you'd forgotten about me. Or worse, that you'd found someone else. Thomas was kind. He offered me stability, a future, so I said yes. I know, James whispered, and I don't blame you. I blame myself every single day. Sarah turned to look at him fully for the first time. And now you're the richest man in the territory, and she gestured to her worn dress, her calloused hands. I'm this. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, James said quietly. Before Sarah could respond, a small voice called out from around the corner. Mama? She turned to see Benny peeking around the building, his wooden horse clutched in one hand, his brown eyes wide and curious. Her son. Her whole world. James's gaze shifted to the boy, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, wonder, sadness. This is Benny, Sarah said softly. My son. Benny approached cautiously, half hiding behind his mother's skirt. He was small for 6, with sandy brown hair that stuck up in all directions and a dusting of freckles across his nose. His clothes were patched but clean, and he held his wooden horse like a treasure. It's all right, sweetheart, Sarah said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. This is an old friend of Mama's. James removed his hat and knelt down to the boy's level, a soft smile crossing his face. That's a fine horse you've got there, son. What's his name? Benny looked up at his mother for permission. When she nodded, he whispered, Thunder. Thunder, James repeated, nodding seriously. That's a strong name for a strong horse. You know, I've got about 200 real horses back at my ranch. Maybe someday your mama could bring you out to see them. Benny's eyes went wide as saucers. 200? Maybe more, James said with a wink. Lost count after a while. Despite herself, Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips. It was the same easy charm James had always had, the way he could make anyone feel special with just a few words. Mr. Garrison appeared at the back door. Mrs. Cordell, I hate to interrupt, but we've got customers piling up front. Sarah stood quickly, brushing dust from her skirt. Of course, I'm coming. James rose as well, settling his hat back on his head. Sarah, wait. Could I give you something? My card, just in case you ever need anything. She hesitated, then took the small piece of paper he offered. It was printed on expensive cardstock. James Holloway, Iron Creek Ranch. I don't need charity, James, she said quietly. I know you don't, he replied, but I'd like to think we're still friends. And friends help each other. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and turned to leave. But at the corner of the building, he paused and looked back. It was good seeing you again, Sarah. Real good. Then he was gone, disappearing around the front of the trading post, leaving her standing there with his card in her hand and 1,000 conflicting emotions swirling in her chest. 3 days passed. Sarah tried to forget the encounter, tried to focus on work and Benny and the endless cycle of survival. But she kept finding herself staring at that card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. Then one evening, as she walked home from the trading post with Benny in tow, she found a package waiting on her doorstep. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Her name was written on top in neat handwriting. What is it, Mama? Benny asked, bouncing excitedly. Sarah unwrapped it carefully. Inside were 3 things: a bolt of beautiful blue fabric, enough to make a new dress, a small bag of peppermint candies, and a carved wooden horse, far more detailed and elegant than the one she'd made for Benny. There was also a note. Sarah. I noticed Benny admiring the horses in town. Thought he might like one that matches Thunder. The fabric is from a merchant friend who owed me a favor. No strings attached. Just one friend looking out for another. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you know where to find me, Jay. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the note. Benny had already claimed the new horse, galloping it through the air with delight, making clip-clop sounds with his tongue. She should have been angry. She should have marched right over to Iron Creek Ranch and returned everything. told James Holloway she didn't need his pity or his gifts. But instead, she found herself sinking onto the porch steps, the fabric soft against her worn hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Because for the first time in 2 years, maybe longer, someone had seen her, really seen her, not as a burden or an obligation, but as a person worth caring for, and that terrified her more than anything. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She would go to Iron Creek Ranch, not to accept charity, but to thank him properly and make it clear where the boundaries lay. She had no idea that this decision would change everything, or that within a week, she and Benny would be living under James Holloway's roof, running from a danger she never saw coming. Sarah hadn't planned on staying at Iron Creek Ranch. She'd only come to return the gifts and establish boundaries. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah had just finished her shift at the trading post when Clayton Cordell, her late husband's younger brother, appeared at her cabin. He was drunk, aggressive, demanding she pay back money he claimed Thomas had owed him before he died. "You got 3 days to come up with $50, Sarah, or I'm taking that cabin," he'd snarled, his breath reeking of whiskey. "It's got Thomas's name on the deed, and I'm blood family. Judge will side with me. $50 might as well have been $500. She didn't have it. She'd never have it. That evening, with nowhere else to turn, and Benny asking why the mean man made Mama cry, Sarah found herself standing at the gates of Iron Creek Ranch, James's card clutched in her trembling hand. She almost turned back a dozen times, but then James appeared on horseback, returning from checking the northern pastures. When he saw her standing there with Benny and a single worn carpet bag, he didn't ask questions. He simply dismounted, looked into her eyes, and said, "Come inside." The ranch house was bigger than Sarah had imagined, a sprawling 2-story structure with a wide porch and real glass windows. Inside, it was furnished simply but well, with sturdy furniture and Navajo rugs on the polished wood floors. "The guest room is upstairs, second door on the right," James said, carrying her bag. "It's got a real bed, a wash basin, and plenty of space for Benny." "James, I can't," Sarah started. "Yes, you can," he interrupted gently. "And you will, at least until you figure out what to do about Clayton." That first night, Sarah barely slept. The bed was too soft, the house too quiet, the situation too surreal. But when she came downstairs at dawn, unable to break the habit of rising early, she found James already in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee and failing spectacularly. "I usually have my foreman's wife handle breakfast," he admitted sheepishly, "but I figured I'd try." Despite everything, Sarah laughed. "Let me." And just like that, a routine began to form. Sarah cooked breakfast while James tended to the early ranch business. Benny would wake to the smell of bacon and biscuits, then follow James around like a shadow, asking endless questions about horses, cattle, and what it meant to be a rancher. "Do the cows ever run away?" Benny asked one morning, perched on the fence rail. "Sometimes," James replied, checking the gate latch. "That's why we've got good fences and better horses. Will you teach me to ride a real horse, not just thunder?" James glanced at Sarah, who was hanging laundry nearby. She nodded slightly. "I think we can arrange that," James said, ruffling Benny's hair. The days blended together in a way that felt both strange and natural. Sarah found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. She organized James's chaotic kitchen, mended clothes that had been neglected for months, and even started a small vegetable garden behind the house. James, in turn, made space for them in ways both big and small. He brought home a school book for Benny from town. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the guest room door without being asked. He sat with them at dinner each evening, telling stories about cattle drives and wild horses, making Benny giggle and Sarah smile despite herself. One evening, after Benny had fallen asleep, Sarah found James on the porch, staring out at the darkening horizon. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, sitting in the rocking chair beside him. I know, he replied. Then why? James turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the lamplight. Because 10 years ago, I made the mistake of leaving you behind. I won't make that mistake again. Sarah's breath caught. James, I'm not asking for anything, Sarah, he continued. I just want you to know that you're safe here. You and Benny both. For as long as you need. She looked down at her hands, calloused and worn. I don't know how to accept help without feeling like I owe something. You don't owe me anything, James said firmly, except maybe more of those biscuits you made this morning. Those were the best thing I've eaten in years. Despite herself, Sarah laughed, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the weight on her chest felt just a little bit lighter. 3 weeks passed like a dream Sarah was afraid to wake from. She and Benny had settled into life at Iron Creek Ranch in ways that felt almost too comfortable, too right. Benny had learned to ride a gentle mare named Daisy, and his laughter echoed across the ranch every afternoon. Sarah found herself smiling more, sleeping better, even humming old songs while she worked in the garden. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. It started with a letter, delivered by a dusty rider one scorching afternoon. James opened it on the porch, his expression darkening with each line he read. What is it? Sarah asked, wiping flour from her hands. Clayton Cordell, James said, his jaw tight. He's filed a claim with the territorial court. Says you owe him money and that he has legal right to Thomas's property, including any assets you might have acquired since. Sarah's blood ran cold. But I don't have any assets. Everything I own fits in that one carpet bag. He's claiming you're living here as my companion, James said carefully, anger flashing in his eyes. He's trying to paint you as some kind of kept woman to damage your reputation and strengthen his claim that you're unfit to make decisions about the estate. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her hands trembled. He's going to ruin me, ruin us. That night, Clayton himself appeared at the ranch gates, emboldened by whiskey and spite. James met him in the yard, hand resting on his revolver. You got no business here, Cordell, James said, his voice deadly calm. Clayton sneered, swaying slightly. Just came to talk to my sister-in-law. Family business, Holloway. None of your concern. Everything concerning Sarah is my concern. That's so? Clayton's grin widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Whole town's talking about how fast the widow Cordell moved into the richest man's house. Makes a man wonder what kind of arrangement y'all got. James took a step forward, but Sarah appeared on the porch, Benny tucked safely inside behind a locked door. Say what you came to say, Clayton, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Clayton's expression turned cruel. Simple, Sarah. You got 1 week to give me what I'm owed. $50 plus interest. Make it $75 now, or I'm taking this to Judge Hartwell, and I promise you, he'll see things my way. I don't have that kind of money, Sarah said. Then maybe your rich rancher friend can help you out, Clayton said, glancing at James with mock innocence. Unless he's already getting his money's worth, if you know what I mean. James moved like lightning, grabbing Clayton by the collar and hauling him close. You ever speak about her that way again and You'll what? Clayton hissed. Shoot me? Go ahead, make it easier for me to prove she's nothing but a gold-digging whore who... The punch came fast and hard. Clayton hit the ground, blood streaming from his nose. Get off my land, James growled, and if you come back, I'll have Sheriff Dawson arrest you for trespassing. Clayton staggered to his feet, spitting blood. You just made this worse for her, Holloway. A whole lot worse. He stumbled toward his horse, but called back over his shoulder, 1 week, Sarah, and if you don't pay, I'm coming for the boy too. Thomas's blood runs in that child. Court might just agree he belongs with family. Sarah's legs nearly gave out. Benny. He was threatening to take Benny. After Clayton disappeared into the darkness, James turned to find Sarah clutching the porch railing, her face pale as death. He can't take Benny, she whispered. James, he can't. I'll die before I let him. He won't, James said firmly. climbing the steps to her. "I won't let that happen." But Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. Clayton knows people. His cousin is a lawyer in Tucson. If he gets a judge to question my character, to say I'm living in sin, that I abandoned my home," her voice broke, "they could take him from me." "Then we'll fight him," James said. "With what?" Sarah cried. "I have nothing, James. No money, no property, no standing. I'm just a poor widow who's been living under your roof. In the eyes of the law, that makes me—" She couldn't finish. James reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I need to think," she said quietly. "I need to figure out what to do." That night, Sarah lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling while Benny slept peacefully beside her. Her mind raced through impossible scenarios, each one ending with her losing her son. By morning she had made her decision, and it would break both their hearts. Sarah woke before dawn, her decision settled like a stone in her chest. She moved quietly through the guest room, packing their few belongings back into the worn carpet bag. Benny's wooden horses, both the one she'd carved and the one James had given him, were wrapped carefully in her spare shawl. She allowed herself one last look at the comfortable room, the soft bed, the life she'd briefly imagined could be hers. Then she steeled herself and began to write. The pencil trembled in her hand as she formed the words, crossing out and rewriting lines through tears that blurred her vision. "James, by the time you read this, Benny and I will be gone. Please don't try to find us. This isn't about what I want. It's about protecting my son. Clayton was right about one thing. My staying here has given him ammunition. Every day I remain under your roof, I give him more proof that I'm an unfit mother. I can't let him take Benny. I won't. I'm going somewhere he can't find us, somewhere we can start over, where no one knows our names or our troubles. Thank you for everything you've done. You gave us safety when we had none, kindness when we'd forgotten what it felt like. You reminded me that good men still exist in this world, but I can't let you fight my battles anymore. This is my burden to carry. Please forgive me for leaving without saying goodbye. Some goodbyes are too hard to say out loud. Take care of yourself, James. You deserve every happiness. Sarah." She folded the letter carefully and left it on the kitchen table, weighted down by the sugar bowl. Then she bundled Benny, still sleeping, into her arms, grabbed their bag, and slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The early morning air was cold and sharp. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs as she hurried down the long drive toward the main road. Benny stirred against her shoulder. "Mama," he mumbled sleepily, "where are we going?" "Shh, sweetheart," she whispered, adjusting his weight. "We're going on an adventure, just you and me. But what about Mr. James and Daisy? I didn't say goodbye." Sarah's heart shattered. "I know, baby, I know." She walked for miles as the sun began to rise, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson. Her arms ached from carrying Benny, her feet blistered in her old boots, but she kept moving. She had a plan: take the stagecoach from the way station at Copper Ridge, head east toward New Mexico territory, maybe find work in Santa Fe or Albuquerque, disappear into a place where Clayton Cordell's threats couldn't reach them. By mid-morning, she reached the way station, a small, weathered building beside a water trough and hitching post. The eastbound stage wasn't due until afternoon, so Sarah sat on a bench outside. Benny curled against her side, both of them exhausted. Inside her pocket, she had exactly $3.40. Enough for passage, maybe. Enough to start over, probably not. But it didn't matter. All that mattered was keeping Benny safe. Back at Iron Creek Ranch, James descended the stairs, his hair still damp from washing, expecting to smell coffee and hear Benny's cheerful chatter. Instead, he found silence. "Sarah?" he called out. No answer. He walked through the empty kitchen, noticed the cold stove, the untouched coffee pot. Then he saw the letter on the table. His hands shook as he unfolded it and read. "No," he whispered. Then louder, "No!" He grabbed his hat and bolted for the stables, saddling his fastest horse, a black stallion named Midnight, in record time. His foreman, Rodriguez, came running. "Boss, what's wrong?" "Sarah's gone," James said, swinging into the saddle. "She took Benny and ran." "I need you to send someone to Sheriff Dawson. Tell him Clayton Cordell is threatening her. I want that man arrested for extortion and harassment." "Where are you going?" "To find her," James said, spurring Midnight forward, "before she disappears forever." He rode hard toward town, his mind racing. She couldn't have gotten far on foot with a child. The trading post, maybe? The church? Then it hit him. The way station at Copper Ridge. It was the only place to catch a stage out of the territory. James leaned low over Midnight's neck, pushing the horse faster. He'd lost Sarah once before by not fighting hard enough. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The desert flew past in a blur of sand and sagebrush. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly, but James didn't slow. His heart pounded in rhythm with Midnight's hooves. He had to reach her. He had to tell her what he should have said 10 years ago, that he loved her, that he'd never stopped, that he would fight Clayton, the courts, the whole damn territory, if that's what it took to keep her and Benny safe. The way station appeared on the horizon like a mirage. And there, sitting on a bench in the shade, was Sarah. James pulled Midnight to a halt in a cloud of dust, dismounting before the horse had fully stopped. Sarah looked up, shock and fear crossing her face as she instinctively pulled Benny closer. "James, don't run," he said, breathing hard as he crossed the distance between them. "Please, Sarah, don't run from me." She stood slowly, Benny clinging to her skirt, confused and frightened. "You shouldn't have come. This only makes it worse." "Makes what worse?" James demanded, his voice raw. "Trying to protect you? Caring about you? Loving you?" The words hung in the desert air between them. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "That's exactly why I had to leave. Don't you see? Every moment I stay with you gives Clayton more ammunition. He'll use it to prove I'm unfit. He'll take Benny from me, and I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose my son, James. He's all I have." "He's not all you have, James," James said fiercely, closing the distance. "You have me. You've always had me, Sarah, even when I was too young and too stupid to fight for you the first time. This isn't about us," she whispered. "This is about my child." "He could be our child," James said, dropping to one knee in front of Benny. He looked at the frightened boy with gentle eyes. "Benny, do you know what I do when something tries to hurt the things I care about on my ranch?" Benny shook his head wide-eyed. "I protect them," James said simply, "with everything I have. And you and your mama? You're the most important things in my world. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is going to take you away from her. Not Clayton Cordell, not any judge, not anyone." "You promise?" Benny whispered. "I promise," James said solemnly, "on my honor as a rancher and a man." Benny looked up at his mother. "Mama, can we trust him?" Sarah's tears spilled over. She couldn't speak, could only nod. James rose and turned to Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. "I let you go once because I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought making money and building something would be enough to come back to you with. But I was wrong. I should have fought for you then. I should have taken you with me, consequences be damned." James --. "Let me finish," he said, taking her hands in his. They were rough and calloused from work, beautiful and strong. "You think you're broken. You think you're just a poor widow with nothing to offer. But when I look at you, I see the strongest woman I've ever known. I see someone who survived loss and hardship and kept going for her child. I see someone who gives her last piece of bread to strangers and works herself to the bone without complaint." Sarah shook her head. "You're seeing something that isn't there." "No," James said firmly. "You're not seeing what's right in front of you. I love you, Sarah May Cordell. I loved you when we were young. I loved you every day we were apart, and I love you now. Maybe more than ever, because I know exactly how strong you had to be to survive." "But Clayton is going to jail," James interrupted. "I sent word to Sheriff Dawson." "Extortion is a crime, and threatening to take a child? That gives us grounds to file charges. My lawyer from Tucson is already on his way. We're going to fight this properly, legally, and we're going to win." "What if we don't?" Sarah whispered, her greatest fear finally voiced. James cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes blazing with determination. "Then we'll keep fighting. We'll take it to the territorial governor if we have to. We'll fight until there's nothing left to fight with. But I am not letting you face this alone, and I am not letting anyone take Benny." "Why?" she asked, tears streaming freely now. "Why would you do all this for us?" "Because you're not alone anymore," James said softly. "Because that little boy deserves a father who will protect him. And because I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life and see your face across the breakfast table." Sarah let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry. "I'm scared, James." "So am I," he admitted, "but I'm not going anywhere. Not this time, not ever again." He pulled her into his arms, and she finally let herself break, crying against his chest while Benny wrapped his small arms around both of them. "Come home," James whispered into her hair. "Let me stand with you. Let me fight for you. Let me love you the way I should have 10 years ago." Sarah pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. Searching for doubt or hesitation, she found none. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The legal battle with Clayton Cordell lasted 6 weeks. James's lawyer from Tucson, a sharp-minded man named Edmund Pierce, tore apart Clayton's claims piece by piece. Sheriff Dawson arrested Clayton for extortion and threatening behavior, and when the case went before Judge Hartwell, the evidence was overwhelming. Clayton had no legitimate claim to Thomas's debts. They'd been fabricated, fueled by whiskey and spite. His threats to take Benny were baseless and illegal. The judge ruled in Sarah's favor on every count, and Clayton was sentenced to 60 days in the territorial jail and ordered to stay at least 100 miles away from Sarah and her son upon release. When the verdict came down, Sarah sat in the courtroom holding James's hand, barely able to believe it was over. "It's done," James whispered. "You're safe now, both of you." That evening, they returned to Iron Creek Ranch, not as temporary guests, but as family. 6 months later, spring 1883, the desert had transformed into a carpet of wildflowers, painting the Arizona territory in shades of gold, purple, and red. A gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and mesquite through the air as chairs were arranged in neat rows in front of the Iron Creek Ranch House. It wasn't a large gathering. Ranchers and their families from neighboring spreads, Mr. Garrison from the trading post, Sheriff Dawson and his wife, Mrs. Fletcher, and a handful of townspeople from Copperstone who had watched Sarah struggle and now celebrated her joy. A simple wooden arch had been erected, decorated with desert blooms and white ribbons that fluttered in the wind. Sarah stood at the edge of the porch, wearing a dress she'd sewn herself from the blue fabric James had given her months ago. It was simple but beautiful, fitted at the waist with delicate buttons down the back. Her dark hair was pinned up with wildflowers woven through it, and her hands, still calloused, still strong, trembled slightly as she held a small bouquet. Beside her stood Benny, dressed in a new shirt and trousers, his hair finely tamed with water and a comb. He clutched a small pillow with 2 golden rings tied to it, his chest puffed with pride. "You ready, Mama?" he whispered, grinning up at her. Sarah looked down at her son, this miracle who had kept her going through the darkest times, and smiled through tears. "I'm ready, sweetheart." "Then let's go get you married to Pa," Benny said, using the name he'd started calling James weeks ago. Together they walked down the aisle between the chairs. Faces turned, smiles brightened, but Sarah saw only one person. James stood beneath the arch in a black suit, his hat removed, his dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight. His gray eyes were fixed on her with such intensity, such love, that her breath caught. When she reached him, Benny carefully handed the ring pillow to the minister, then whispered loudly, "Don't mess this up, Pa." Laughter rippled through the gathering, and even James grinned. "I'll do my best, son." The minister, an old circuit preacher named Reverend Matthews, smiled warmly. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." But Sarah barely heard the words. She was lost in James's eyes, in the feeling of his hands holding hers, warm and steady and real. When it came time for vows, James spoke first, his voice clear and unwavering. "Sarah, I made a lot of mistakes in my life, but the biggest was leaving you behind. I promise you now, in front of God and everyone here, that I will never leave again. I will stand beside you in good times and bad. I will protect you and Benny with everything I have. I will love you every day for the rest of my life, and even